to its Mediterranean nature and location in the center of South America, Paraguay is a country that is hardly on everyone's lips. However, its territory was the scene of the bloodiest and deadliest war that South America has ever seen. Under the controversial Marshal Francisco Solano Lopez, the Guarani people made history with one of the saddest episodes of humanity, the War of the Triple Alliance. Are you interested in learning about the causes, development, and consequences of this fateful episode? All right, then stay until the end of the video. Let's go back to the viceregal era, when Spain and Portugal dominated the governance of Paraguay and the viceroyalty of Brazil, respectively. Between these two territories, there were various border disputes, which included the slave expeditions of Luso-Brazilian bandeirantes in Spanish missionary territories. These controversies were partially resolved with the Treaty of Madrid of 1750, although without establishing names of defined geographical features, such as borders. So various interpretations would arise after the independence of both countries. On the other hand, there were also controversies between Argentina and Paraguay, after the latter had remained on the sidelines of the unification of the provinces of the Rio de la Plata when it had been part of its viceroyalty. These were based on the untamed area of the Boreal Chaco, whose conquest was never completed by the Spaniards, as well as the area of Eastern Missions, where there was also a conflict between Argentina and Brazil. Until the 60s, when this conflict took place, President Francisco Solano Lopez had taken command of Paraguay, a country that was undergoing industrialization. After certain internal conflicts, Argentina had consolidated a unitary government under Bartolomé Mitre. Brazil was an expanding empire ruled by Pedro II. Finally, we have Uruguay, a country that was in a civil war between the White and Colorado parties, which were backed by Paraguay and Brazil and Argentina, respectively. Yes, a typical game of alliances before a war starts. And of course, add to this the territorial conflicts and the dispute over the hegemony of the La Plata Basin. In addition to this, a possible British intervention is often put on the table, who would have supported the unification of Paraguay. In conclusion, let's move on to the facts. During the aforementioned civil war, Uruguay was under the control of the White Party government. Brazil, which was an ally of Venancio Flores' Red Party, accused his government of stealing their cattle at the border. In response to their refusal to answer, Brazil undertook the invasion of Uruguay in 1864, successfully overthrowing President Aguirre and placing their ally Flores as de facto president. Lopez's response was to capture 2 Brazilian ships in his waters, as well as take their officers as prisoners. This led to the breakdown of relations between the two countries. While Argentina remained neutral, Brazil engaged in the war. In order to maintain their neutrality at first, the drums of war began to sound. This bloody conflict begins with the Mato Grosso front. This campaign begins with the Paraguayan invasion of the mentioned region, which was poorly protected by the imperial troops. The element of surprise contributed to Paraguay being able to advance quickly at the beginning. Of course, the distance to the capital, Rio de Janeiro, was too great to be able to advance there. In addition to this, at the beginning of 1865, Paraguay opened a new front in the province of Corrientes in neutral Argentina. The Paraguayan objective was to reach Uruguay to free it from the Brazilian invasion and reinstate the regime of their allies from the White Party. With Argentina's denial to let military goods cross its land, Lopez opts to invade them to meet his objective. This initiates the Triple Alliance of Brazil, Paraguay, and Paraguay, Argentina, and Uruguay, still led by ally Flores. While this represented a tremendous disadvantage for Paraguay from the start, the general consensus of the Argentine population was not to get involved in any war. Remember this fact. Paraguay would reach Paso de los Libres bordering Brazil and very close to Uruguay. Faced with the tremendous superiority of the enemy, Paraguay was halted during the Battle of Yatay. The next month, Paraguay was ravaged by war. Besieged in Uruguay and due to hunger and low morale, the Paraguayans were defeated and compelled to retreat. Unable to reach Uruguay, the latter remains in the Triple Alliance. With this, the Paraguayans had to summon soldiers who had successfully advanced through Mato Grosso to defend Paraguayan territory. With this, the forces concentrate in Tuyuti, a swamp on the southwestern border of Paraguay. Here, the bloody Battle of Tuyuti was fought, where despite concentrating 23,000 men, the Allies prevailed with 35,000, leaving a balance of 15,000 dead. This is remembered as the deadliest battle in the history of South America. This last massacre is part of the Humaita campaign, where the Allies successfully advance, although being stopped at the Battle of Curupaiti at the homonymous Paraguayan fort. Despite the usual Allied superiority, the poor terrain conditions hindered the Allied attack, thus achieving the Paraguayans the greatest victory of the war, ending with 4,000 enemy soldiers in exchange for less than 100 casualties. The above paralyzed the operations of the Allies for 10 months and resulted in the sinking of President Miter's reputation, which rekindled the Argentine people's rejection of the war. This led to the revolution. In the Revolution of the Colorados, where the Argentine army had to withdraw to calm the revolts. For its part, Uruguay also withdrew, leaving only 700 soldiers. To the above is added a new factor in the war. The arrival of Brazilian troops sparked a cholera epidemic in the region, which caused the death of 4,000 Brazilian soldiers, although the most affected were Argentine civilians and especially Paraguayans. This, while Brazil was determined to launch a counterattack from mid-1867. Despite the above, Paraguay achieved new victories, such as in Paso and Paraguay and Villa Pilar. However, the Brazilians ended up winning at the Humaita Pass. With the return of Allied support, Paraguay was definitively defeated in the Humaita campaign around August 1868, which forced the withdrawal of the remaining troops in Mato Grosso. Now all Paraguay had left was the defense of its territory. Following this, the Piquichiri campaign began, the fourth phase of the war in which Lopez set up a defensive front on the homonymous stream in the central department, very close to Asuncion, the final objective of the Allies. The Duke of Caxias, in command of the Allied forces, knew that the geography to get there directly was complicated, so he chose to move the ground forces with the Allied troops along the coast of Chaco. Paraguay, for its part, tried to attack in the Battle of Itororó, having to withdraw its troops in the face of Brazilian superiority. By the end of the month, the Paraguayans were again defeated in the Battle of Ita and Bat, after which, according to some sources, less than 100 men of the professional army would survive. Next Allied target, Asuncion. And so it was. The Allies arrive at the capital, which they found almost empty. The Paraguayan troops had retreated inland. Lopez then establishes a new capital in Piribaibay. It is worth noting here that the demoralized Marshal had arrested and executed certain officers who failed in the campaigns, even leading to the arrest of his own family on suspicion of a conspiracy against him. Yes, bad time to become totalitarian. With the above, the campaign of the mountain ranges begins, where, from July of '69, the forces of Brazil, now led by the Emperor's son-in-law, Count God, begin the pursuit of the last bastion of Paraguayan resistance, given that Lopez still did not surrender despite the occupation of Asuncion. And well, as you can imagine, in the face of the decimated Paraguayan people, this campaign is pure necessity. The Allies reached Lopez in Piribaibay, where he had established the new capital, thus beginning the eponymous battle. The scarce 1,600 soldiers were defeated by the 20,000 Brazilian fighters, prompting the retreat of Marshal and General Bernardino Caballero, who regroups the forces in Acostanu. And to tell the truth, these forces were composed of 500 veteran soldiers and 3,500 children. Yes, just as you hear it, in this battle, 20,000 Brazilian soldiers destroyed an army composed of children whose weaponry was almost exclusively sticks, spears, and machetes. After the assured victory, the Count of Water revealed his disturbing inhumanity. After the massacre, The mothers of the Paraguayan children came out to rescue the bodies of their children and aid the survivors, to which the Count of Water ordered the surrounding brush to be set on fire, incinerating both children and mothers. The same fate occurred at the Paraguay hospital, filled with war wounded, which he surrounded and set on fire. This is considered the most terrible war crime in the history of our region. After this defeat, the pursuit of Lopez begins, who continues to escape northward, passing through the Amambe mountain range, an army composed mostly of poorly armed civilians. The diminished Paraguayan army was able to resist a couple more months, although they would eventually be caught. In March 1870 in Cerro Corá, a place in the Amambe department. Here the final battle would take place, where the last Paraguayan bastion, composed of 409 fighters, is defeated. Marshal Lopez was killed in combat, pierced by a spear after uttering his famous phrase, "I die for my country." The war had ended after a fateful defeat of the Paraguayans. This war brought devastating economic, social, demographic, and political consequences for the Paraguayans. In addition to losing almost all disputed territories to Brazil and Argentina, what remained of Paraguay became a satellite state of Brazil. Even the Brazilian plenipotentiary minister in Paraguay was almost officially called the Viceroy of Paraguay. Needless to say, the terrible economic crisis that was looming over much of the region. Marshal Lopez's death in battle, after his renowned quote, led to significant debt for the Paraguayan government. But without a doubt, the most tragic consequence was the demographic catastrophe after the war. The data from that time is controversial, but some positions estimate a mortality rate, due to direct or indirect causes such as famine and cholera, of up to 60% of the total population, as well as 90% of all males. Marshal Lopez was killed in war, speared after saying his famous phrase, "Thanks from the Paraguayan people." Peru and Colombia showed moral support by offering Colombian citizenship to surviving Paraguayans. Finally, the heroism of Francisco Solano Lopez is called into question. While some Paraguayans consider him a great patriot who fought to the end for his country, others remember him as a tyrant who led Paraguay to disaster. Whatever it may be, this sad episode remains as a scar, both in the Paraguayan people and in the rest of the continent. And what do you think? Would you remember Marshal Lopez as a hero or as the cause of thousands of misfortunes? Do you agree with the alleged British intervention? Don't forget to leave your comment. And if you like this video, support me with a like and subscribe to my channel. You can also follow me on my social networks, and if you're interested in supporting this project, any donation on Patreon is welcome. See you next time.